Session Blood.
All right, welcome back to Session Blood, everyone. I'm here with Carol again today.
Hey guys.
So today what we're doing is something a little bit different, where we've recorded one of our games on Tabletop Simulator, and we took a few notes during the game, and we're just going to do a bit of a commentary on our sort of deck decisions, certain turns explaining why we did certain things and what we were thinking at the time.
Yeah, but basically giving an overview of the Brute versus Ninja matchup for those of you who want to improve your game and maybe take on, learn a thing or two about the matchup as well.
Yeah, because I know we had a few people in the community asking about Brute recently, and Carol's a very good Brute player, so we thought this could be a good thing to kick things off on. So before we kick things off, we'll just talk about what we were thinking about going into the matchup. So from my side and then from Carol's. So on my side as Ninja vs. Brute, the cards I'm always concerned about are things like a single barraging beatdown, intimidating a card, and then a weapon swing for up to 8 damage. As we mentioned in our recent podcast, it puts you in a difficult spot as Ninja, because if you block with one card and take 5 damage, it makes it hard to get the same amount of damage back. Also, really difficult turns in this matchup are when the Brute player has 3 counters on Tunic and they pitch a blue card and play Command and Conquer. Very tough blocking that as a Ninja, because clearly they've got 2 resources up representing Pummel, and quite often in Ninja your arsenal card will be integral to your turn. Things such as Plunder Run, Art of War, maybe a League Tap, Surging, Gust Wave, anything along those lines. And it puts you in a bit of a bind because you want to block for 6 instead of a turn, but if you block for 6 and they pummel, it's a huge blowout. You take 4 damage, you lose your arsenal, you lose another card from hand, and it's just a bad time in general. So that's the thing I look for when I'm playing Brute a lot of the time. Is a key thing to keep an eye on is their defense reactions, how many they've used and how many they have left, and obviously armor as well. If you can chip through their armor and you can get through a lot of their defense reactions, it makes the game a bit easier, because then things like League Tap for 4 are much harder to block. And the other sort of boogeyman card sometimes is Bonehead Barrier, because if they roll well on that, it really shuts down your turn. But anyway, I'm going to pass it on to Carol for his thoughts.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm quite comfortable in the Ninja matchup because of cards like you mentioned, Barraging Beatdown, where first of all, you have to look at what makes Ninja tick. And I mean, we all have, whenever you verse a Ninja, it's these powerful combo lines that can gain a lot of value just from connecting combos and dealing a lot of damage. So what you want to do is disrupt Ninja's hands. The less cards they have in their hand, the weaker their turn will be. Just to, give you an example, a Ninja with 2 cards in hand and no arsenal can do very minimal damage. So what I try and do is use those single barraging beatdowns to put them in a tricky spot where, potentially a blocking card gets intimidated, and then they're forced to use 2 of their, very aggressive cards to block with or take a bunch of damage. Now, I feel that Ninja is significantly, it's exponentially better with 4 cards and 1 card in an arsenal than, say, 3 or even,
even 4 cards sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, as a Brute player, that's what I want to do. I want to get rid of those cards, really put them in a tough spot. And also, I feel like one of Ninja's weaknesses is their lack of armor. As a Brute player, I have, 3 potential blocks from Scabskin, 3 from Skullcap, and 1 from Tunic, which is a lot of blocks that I can just kind of use to stop these powerful attacks.
And just to clarify briefly there for players who might not get what he means by 3, it's blocking for 2 and then blocking subsequently for 1 damage later on.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas Ninja kind of, they have very limited blocks. Like a Mask is a single block for 2 damage, which is very punishing for Ninja to block with. There's 1 block with the Scalers and 1 with Tunic, and that's it. So they're quite vulnerable when it comes to defense. and that's basically where you want to make the most of
the impact. And just before we begin, one final thing, what Carol mentioned about Ninja having these strong combo lines, that's something I'm always a bit concerned about, or keeping an eye on when I'm playing a game, is that if you're just keeping pace with Brute, but you're burning through those big combo lines early, it looks like you're ahead, but then you get to mid-game, and even one or two off turns, and Brute's right back in the game. So one thing I try and do is conserve things like my red gust waves or my Magenshis for turns where I'm pretty sure I'm either going to strip his hand and set up a really strong next turn, or turns that I know I can get through with things like Ancestral Empowerment or Razor Reflex.
Yeah, and so going into the matchup as Brute, I like to play a very defensive game. What that means is I, try and use my defense reactions as much as possible to stop that damage, that exponential kind of value from the combos, from getting those Katsu triggers. And I'm not afraid to use up my cards, because even a yellow pitch and swing with Romping Club, I'm happy to do that if it means, if I block all the damage from the Ninja, get left with one card, and then attack with Romping Club, that's already me being ahead.
Exactly. All right, so we'll just kick things off and have a look at our sideboard choices. So the first one here, we're going to look at Carol's sideboard for the game. I'm just going to pause it briefly, and if you just want to give a quick rundown about why you've decided to go with the sideboard.
So I've decided, unmovables, I feel...
no good.
No good. Basically, I try to get rid of cards that don't block. That's why the Heart's there, that's why the Remembrance there. I feel like we never go to late game. I get rid of one Alpha Rampage because that card requires 3 cards to have a good turn. I feel like I run 2 in my list. I think 1 is enough. And also the drones, I feel like they're really useful when it drags on to late game, which rarely goes against Ninja. And then you have all these null runes against basically Mage. The Art of War is another card that doesn't really block, and it's a card that I use versus control decks mainly.
Well, one card I just want to ask you about here is the Bonehead Barrier, because I did mention before that can be quite tough to play against as Ninja. What was your reasoning behind taking that out?
Yeah, so in this matchup, it depends on the match. Sometimes I keep both of my Boneheads in against Ninja, sometimes I take one out. In this instance, I tried to take one out because I don't want to get in a situation where I have 2 Boneheads in hand, and and it just can get clunky with that. Yeah,
you basically want to minimize the amount of turns where you can't fully block against Ninja. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I really want to draw into those Barragings. That's, I think, 1 card less to draw into that. I think it's because I won the dice roll, therefore I was going first, so I wanted to make sure that I draw into a Barraging.
And just finally, before we move on to mine, do you just want to explain quickly why you decided to go first in this matchup?
I wanted to go first because I wanted to potentially draw into a defense reaction, or basically just set up a turn where I can put pressure on my next turn. That was basically my reasoning.
Yeah. And also, Brute, you can just get turns where you get the triple Intimidate in turn 1, get through 8 damage, and you're just way ahead.
Yeah, and also, extra counter on Tunic can be crucial with a Command and Conquer and CNC play.
Alright, so just moving on to my sideboard here. One thing is, I decided to play 64 cards, I believe, in this matchup. It's personal preference. Some Ninja players may disagree and think you're better off going down to just a clean list of 60 to maximize your best combo lines. For this one, from my experience, Brute, it can sometimes descend into a bit of a grind out, and like Carol mentioned, I know they like to play it quite defensively, and you have to discard a lot of cards to Katsu, and you have to block certain turns. So I just like having the flexibility to have a few extra cards. And just looking at my list here, it's a similar thing to Carol's sideboard. I wanted to take out the cards that don't block particularly well. So I've taken out 1 Art of War, Energy Potion. If I was going first, I may have left that in, but going seconds, you just don't want to have another 0 block card. Fluster Fist, I have 3 of them on the list. It's a 4 attack. Attacks for 4, doesn't have go again, so I just don't want too many of those. I've only got 1 Rabble on the list to cut that because it blocks for 2. Cut a Surgeon because it blocks for 2. unmovables just aren't very good against Brute because they intimidate too many cards. And again, that's a yellow reflex there. If the viewers can't see it, I run one of those as some secret tech, but again, it blocks it too. So basically, I just don't want to get caught in a situation where a Command and Conquer is just completely unblockable or it's just gonna totally strip my hand.
Yeah, and also, looking at your sideboard, I think it's worth to point out that you do run Flick Flax and you do run defense reacts against Brute.
Oh, actually, yeah, sorry, that's a good point that I missed. So yeah, I do have 3 red Sink Belows and 2 red Flick Flax. I have tried playing against Brutes with sort of either, just 2 to 3, but I think you just really, really need to have those because sometimes the Brute player might get a bit greedy or think it's worth it to intimidate 3 cards and try get you with things like Barraging Beatdown, cards that deal additional damage if you don't block with 2 cards, or just simply intimidate 3 cards and hit you for a ton of damage. Having Sinks and Flick Flax allows you a bit more sort of time to play the game at your own pace. It allows you to sometimes shut down turns that would just absolutely crush you with them. So, and also Flick Flag, it's got that additional benefit is you can block their first attack if they've got multiple actions and then block the second one.
Okay, so I won the dice roll. I'm going first. Now, this is a bit of a tricky hand where I wasn't too sure how to really push through some damage. We have, the best hand that I can see, the best attack that I can see to do is to go for a Smash Instinct, pitch an attack, and I just felt like that is a bit of a weak start, and just because it's turn 1, I've decided to go for a Scab Skin roll, because a Scab Skin roll, if I got 2 action points here, I can afford to go for a Smash Instinct and a Romping Club, which would put a lot of pressure on Kieran. Unfortunately, I did roll a 1.
Wob wom.
Which was quite disappointing, but hey, that's the joys of playing Brute. Now I set a Reckless Swing in the arsenal just because it's a defense react and can help me defend versus Kieran's combo lines.
Yeah, so moving on to my first turn, I've got kind of an interesting hand here with the yellow Gust Wave, yellow Rising Knee, Surging, and Art of War. There's a few different lines. One line I considered doing was just pitching Rising Knee, Kadaching twice, pitching Gust Wave, and playing Surging to threaten a Mask Trigger. Ultimately, however, I thought I just wanted to put the pressure on turn 1 and just go for the immediate Surging and follow up with the Gust Wave. One of my thoughts here was as well is that if I pull out a defense reaction with the yellow Surging Strike, I'm kind of happy.
Yeah,
now,
I decided to let that one through just because if he has the full, if he can just do the crazy ninja stuff, I'm just happy to set up a turn where I can go life for life into a club swing at this point.
Yeah, one thing I'll just point out to the viewers here is, in this situation, I've chosen not to use Katsu. So I could upgrade the yellow Gust Wave into a red here. Like I mentioned earlier in the matchup, I really want to conserve those cards for stronger turns later on in the game. And another thought process, I figure if I play the Gust Wave for 3 here, it might be representing something like an Ancestral Empowerment. So I thought I'd just go for it, and if he blocks it for 3, I just set the Art of War, try set that up for another turn, or if he overblocks, I'm very happy with that as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. I went for an overblock, just to prevent getting blown out by something like him popping the Scalers or an Ancestral Empowerment, and to be honest, I don't really need these 2 cards in my turn anyway. I felt it was a safer choice.
They're just kind of dead cards to you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Then we've got a fairly simple turn coming up here. Carol's taking the damage, so he sets up the Life for a Life.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like Life for a Life is a pretty decent card in this matchup just because of that lack of defense that Ninja has. So Kieran decides to take all this. And this is what I mean about Ninja. A lot of the time they do like to take a lot of damage in hopes of dealing a lot more damage back on their turn. which is kind of tricky sometimes because you do want to maximize the damage that you deal in your turn.
Yeah, my turn, I decided to take all the damage here. You'll see me sort of do a last minute tunic trigger. Always remember your tunic, people. So my thought is here, I just want to set up Kodachi into Leg Tap, Rising Knee, Snatch, which puts a lot of damage output and puts some pressure on.
Yeah, exactly. I found my hand to be quite clunky against a ninja because we do have all these low blocks. We have a somersault and a pursuit, which, to be honest, I usually side out against ninja, but I forgot this time. But yeah, basically, the Reckless Swing is another kind of clunky card in this situation. But after some thought, I've decided to try and shut down that leg tap. Basically overblock with CNC and block with my armor.
Stops an ancestral.
Yeah, exactly.
And I did actually have the option here to play a single Kodachi into Leg Tap into Rising Knee in case I wanted to fetch up a Hurricane Kick. My issue with that line is that I would only be able to play the Hurricane Kick once anyway with my resources.
Yeah, and I decided to take the damage because it doesn't give Kieran any value if there's no on-hit effects on this one, so I decided to just wait with my defense reacts and just save them for plays that give Kieran an advantage. And in this case, it paid off because, I managed to block up the snatch. Even though, there wasn't much of a value of him drawing the card, but I thought it opens that arsenal for a somersault. And here I've decided to just pitch the sigil instead of using the sigil, because sigils I find against ninja especially gets exponentially better in the late game.
Yeah, when you're chipping away with Kodachis, last thing you want is to see a sigil when they're on 1 life.
Yeah.
So Carol's attack for the club here. Often on these types of turns, I heavily prioritize setting up things like Sink Below and Arsenal to shut down those barraging turns. The issue is here I've got 3 counters on Tunic next turn and an Art of War and Arsenal. So my process here that I need something maybe decent to start triggering that Art of War turn. So we'll see me sink here, try to get something else to set up. And clearly this has turned off my Scar for a Scar, but I'm looking to banish that with Art of War anyway. Yeah, because another line here is I could pitch Gust Wave, pitch Razor, and then just Scar for 4 and wait for a better turn to use Art of War. But I am kind of worried in this situation about just letting him Command and Conquer me next turn or get more pressure on. So yeah, here I'm thinking about go again or +1, and I do decide to go for the +1. This hand represents a few different lines. One option was actually to go for, say, a Gust Wave into Razor Reflex to fetch up Magenshis, but again, that's going to get blocked out. So I think my better play here is to Kodachi twice, and play a Fluster Fist threatening Razor, which also would threaten Mass trigger.
Yeah, and I feel that's actually the scariest thing as a brute player for me, I find, when versing Ninja, is those Kodachi hits. And Kieran does a good job on really utilizing those hits for one, that over the course of the game, because I do play such a defensive game and it does tend to drag on, all those Kodachis over the course of the game really add up.
Now in this situation, when I play Fluster for 4 here, I'm thinking in my mind, if Carol blocks for 3, there's a decent chance he's holding that defense reaction in Arsenal. So when I'm playing a Razor here, the decision is a little bit, do I want to trade a Razor for a defense react? In this situation, I do, because I want to try and get through those defense reacts as quickly as possible. And because I'm setting a red Gust Wave in Arsenal, I'm hoping that I'm going to draw into a Surging Strike to set up a big turn next turn.
Yeah, so I did overblock. You were attacking for 5.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was
Yeah,
attacking the
so-
5 with Art of War.
Yeah, so basically I tried to block up because I thought Kieran might have a reflex, saving that defense reaction. And what it does is it lets me just swing at the club on my turn and set up another somersault to really maximize the value of having those somersaults in my deck.
And we can see here that, like, well, I've been putting on a bit of pressure with momentum. The life's actually equal at 28.
Yeah, and as I was saying, those single attacks with club are just fine.
Unfortunately for me here, as you can see, I've drawn both the red Surging and a McGinchie's. So that is pretty legit for me.
Yeah, so a lot of the time what I try to do against a ninja is to really prepare for the worst, which, when you see a red Surging Strike, the worst scenario is that you block up the Surging and that they have the combo in their hand. That's why a lot of the time I let the Surging through just to have enough cards to block up any further combo chains.
Yeah, because I really wanted Carol to block for 5 here. If he blocks the Surging for 5, I then drop a Gust Wave for 4 into a McGinchie's, and that is probably getting at least... I mean, he'd had to have a defense react plus use armor to stop all that.
Yeah, and here we go. Red Surging into red Gust Wave, which is worst case scenario, but at least I kind of still have cards from not blocking the Surging.
And one thing is here as well, against the Ninja Blade situation, you could potentially block for 4 and just try and force them to crack the scales. A little bit riskier if McGinchie's is coming down.
Yeah, so basically Kieran forced me to...
And as you can see here, Carol blocks for 3 and then waits for reaction steps as well, which is always the right play because you never know, they might get greedy, drop an Ancestral Empowerment, anything like that. It doesn't harm you just to make them pass priority, essentially. So yeah, then he blocks out the line. And again, as we'll see here, I just dropped basically the Dream full combo line from hand, and Carol blocked the whole thing without equipment and took 5 damage, and now he's just going to swing back with club for 4.
Yeah, so at this stage of the game, I still haven't had a good turn to go for a barraging play or a command and conquer play. But every turn, Kieran's just putting so much pressure with his combo lines that, at this point, I'm quite happy with just a club swing.
And one thing to keep an eye on during this game as well is against a deck like Brute, I think it's important to try and get through that Kodachi damage as much as possible, because most of the time they're not going to block the Kodachis, and usually if they do block the second Kodachi anyway, you're pretty happy with it. So I was thinking through a couple of different lines here. Where am I at? So what I'm thinking is I'll Kodachi twice here. And then one option is to E-Strike for 5 with Go again. But what you'll actually see me do is throw out the head jab here. The reason for that is sometimes you can catch people out who decide, because it's only attack for 1, they want to block with the armor or the equipment, which actually is a lot of time that's incorrect as well. And I believe you'll see Carol avoid that trap, sadly for me here.
I usually only take the 2 Kodachi hits if I have a defense reaction in my hand. Let's say I didn't have that Fate Foreseen, I would consider to block up that second Kodachi just to stop Kieran's mask trigger. Because there's no benefit of Kieran, there's no on-head effects, I've decided to save that Fate Foreseen for the next turn, So what I do is just rinse and repeat, swing with club, arsenal my defense reaction, and just wait for, basically, I'm just waiting for Kieran to have an off turn, which he doesn't seem to be getting.
And so here I did have the sink below in hand, but I chose not to use it because I'm looking at trying to set up quite a big turn here. Because I feel like I'm reasonably ahead. I've got the red leg tab, the red rising knee, and I've got the enlightened strike and arsenal. So what that lets me do is gives me options. So I can use tunic to go leg tap, rising knee, and then I can follow that up with an enlightened strike for 7. Depending on what he blocks with, I can then place either the sink below if I want to go defensive, or the gust wave on the bottom if I want to go offensive.
Yeah, I was very happy to draw that bonehead at this stage of the game, just because I do have that counter on tunic. And to be honest, looking back at the game, I think maybe it was correct to have both the bonehead barriers in there just to stop the pressure. And I finally drew a red Barragine, which I'm really keen to keep to kind of put Kieran in a tough spot.
And again, what you see Carol's done very well this game is, like you mentioned before, he's playing defensively to wait for an off turn. Like, fortunately for me, I've drawn really well to sort of help shut that down. But for example, if this was an off turn, he only needed to block with 2 cards. Suddenly, he's only sort of 5 life behind. He's got the defense react. He has barraging, a lot of things.
Yeah, so I did actually consider blocking here anyhow, just to really stop Kieran's turn. But I've decided there's no point, because I'm still left with 1 prevention damage counter from Bonehead. That's why I just decided not to block and just wait for the next attacks.
Yeah, so here, this is where the Enlightened Strike is really going to come through for me here, to just have that additional follow-up to put pressure on.
Yeah, I mean, in total, Kieran's dealing 4, 9, and then another 7...
16 damage.
16 damage in 1 turn, which, to be honest, I feel okay with the amount of damage I prevented, but I really wanted to go for that barraging beatdown next turn. And again, he's not gaining anything from, there's no on-head effects from that Enlightened. So I decided to just take the damage just to, gain back the momentum with the barraging beatdown next turn.
Yeah, and the reason I decided to put the Gust Wave on the bottom there is I've gone through 2 Surging Strikes already. And I know Brute, it doesn't take much for you to start taking damage and then right back in the game. So I just wanted to have the option of having the safe Surging Strike available. The safe Sink Below available. So here's that classic turn we're talking about. The Barraging Beatdown intimidates out my Ancestral Empowerment, and it's coming in for 8. So again, this puts me in a bit of a tough spot, because I can block with Hurricane Kick and Sink Below, for example, here, take no damage, but then my next turn is Ancestral Empowerment, Scar, and Razor in my hands, which isn't amazing. So it's... And as you can see here, Carol saved the Sink Below.
Yeah, I was really hoping to connect with that barraging just to even out the life totals, but at this point of the game, I'm already falling quite far behind. So to be honest, I'm quite happy for Kieran to just double block this, just to really weaken his turn, his next attack, because. Yeah, as we mentioned before, Ninja is definitely not as strong.
So 2 or 3 card hand deck.
The 2 and 3 card hands with Ninja tend to be quite underwhelming compared to other classes.
Yeah, so I actually decided to save the Sink Below here. The reason for that is I just want to maintain my life lead, and I figure in my turn I just put a counter on Tunic. And I'm thinking I can still throw out 5 damage against Carol. And if I can put out 5 damage, that's probably going to take at least 1 card from his hand to block. And then I'm setting up with a Sink Below available to block out his attack. and ideally keep my 4-card hand to really start putting the pressure on. And again, the Kodachis are just so critical at this point. Each one's hitting for 10% of his health.
Yeah, I feel like this game, it just shows the power what Kodachis can do. I mean, I've been, blocking as much as I can this game, and it still hasn't really saved my life total that much, purely because of those Kodachi hits.
And just one thing I want to point out there, you'll see Carol overblock with 2 cards rather than use his defense react from Arsenal. I believe the reason for that is you just want to throw out a barraging, attack me with your weapon, and save defense react for a turn next turn.
Yeah, I just didn't have a decent 3-card attack there. I could have, I could have gone for maybe like a Rekaromb or like a, I just felt that barraging into Romping Club is probably the best attack I had, so I might as well try and save some life, overblock that Scar, make sure I don't take... At this point, my life total is looking really low, so I'm trying to basically maintain it as much as possible.
Yeah, and this situation for me, I'm not as concerned about the damage as it's a blue barraging beatdown. One thing I do want to improve upon is my hand here. Because the issue is if I can save a little bit of life and improve my hand, it then becomes worth it.
Yeah, and this is, I think, where the sync ability really kind of help with your consistency there. Like we've seen you sync before where you put a Razor Reflex on the bottom. From my perspective when playing the game, I just felt like you had God Drone time after time.
That's the thing. Like sometimes in these games, one person just draws really well,
But to be honest, like this just shows you the power of syncs and the power of, creating those consistent hands.
Yeah, one thing I just want to point out there, you always want to be looking at your next turn for Ninja. So I was tossing up between Plunder Run and the Flick Flack there. Just because I'm decently far ahead on life, I decided to keep the Plunder Run to try and I know I'm going to have 3 counters on Tunic plus Plunder Run next turn. That's why I decided to keep that one here. Now, there are a few lines available for this turn. So you could just open up with a Surging Strike right off the bat, or you could even just try and chip in with Kodachi damage, set the red Plunder, and save the Surging for a Plunder Run Surging turn. What my problem with those is that if you get greedy against Brute, they can really, really punish you. So I've decided to open up the leg tap here, just on the off chance. I'm pretty confident Carol's going to block it out, but just on the off chance he decides not to block it because he can deal with the Rising Knee, that lets me then get rid of the red Plunder Run, pick up a Gust Wave, and just really pressure him. But yeah, he does block correctly here.
Yeah, I was considering actually possibly taking it just because of my hand. Like, I could have gone for a barraging into Blood Rush Bellow turn and just really try and put the damage back on, but it was just too hard. Yeah, at this point, every damage counts, so I'm trying my best to prevent all those hits.
And one thing we can see there, Carol effectively used the Skull Cap to block for 2, which is good, because he knows he's going to get another block out with it. And again, he's just holding on to that defense react for as long as possible, because he knows that's going to be a key card here. And also, he's got the 3 counters on Tunic, so now he gets to set up the Blood Rush Bellow pack, Intimidate turn.
Yeah, I mean, this turn would have been much nicer with, the other cards, where I'm kind of, now I'm just like, after drawing that, I'm like, I wish I saved one of those cards just because it would have let me go for another Blood Rush. So there is a bit of a trade-off there. Like, if he used the Sync, he would have had an additional resource to set up a double Blood Rush Bellow, so... Yeah, but I'm happy that I... get an attack for 7 and just try and put some pressure back on Kieran.
Yeah, now, in these situations, it's tempting to think that you're 9 life ahead, so you just take 7 and then pressure your turn. But, like I mentioned, it's really sort of dicing with danger, because my hand here is a bit of an off turn. I've got the Plunder Run, but it's not really putting it to its best use. So what I'm thinking about here is if I want to use the flick flack on this, or if I simply want to eat the damage and perhaps set up the flick flack in my arsenal next turn. One thing, again, for Ninja, you always want to be considering your next turn. So what's sort of making me lean towards using the flick flack here is it then allows me to threaten a mass trigger with no cards in hand. If you threaten a mass trigger with one card in hand, a lot of the time the other player won't care, because if you end your turn with 2 cards in hand, you arsenal 1 and draw 3, so you're in the same spot as if you had 1 card anyway. Now, this turn coming up was a little bit complicated for me because I'm starting to get a bit worried that the life totals are getting too close, and I know Carol's got a card in Arsenal that he hasn't used for a long time, so I'm a little bit worried about just getting blown out by a defense react. One line I considered was just going Plunder Run, Head Jab for 4, then Pitch, Gust Wave, Kadachi twice, and Hurricane Technique with Tunic to thread a mask. The problem with that turn is it just gets massively blown out by a Sink Below. If he Sink Belows the Head Jab, he could then block one of the Kadachis with Equipment and then block my Hurricane Kick, and I've got very little damage through.
And it's interesting because I feel like the thing that makes a good ninja, great ninja, is not maximizing damage on good hands. It's actually maximizing your damage on real clunky hands that you're not quite sure what the best thing to do, the best line to do is. I think that's absolutely right. Like I think the mark of a good player is how you play your bad hands. So yes, I mean, that's one thing, as Carol writes about in his articles. If you're getting bad hands, it's not about giving up and getting frustrated or saying, oh, this other guy's getting really lucky. Like, Carol's been on the wrong side of this game, essentially the entire game, and has actually brought it back to not a terrible position. So it's all about trying to make the most of what you've got effectively. Yeah, exactly.
Now here you see some trademark here in slow play. Carol knows all about it. Yep, so I decided to go for the Plunder Run here, and my thought process is that if I can put a bit of pressure on with a Hurricane Kick for 7 with Snapdragon Scalers up, that allows me to set the Gust Wave. I've gone through 2 Surgings, but I haven't seen a Surging Strike in quite a while. So if I'm setting that Gust Wave, I'm thinking, well, maybe I can draw one of my Surgings to just try to finish him off the next turn, or at least just maintain a card in Arsenal, maintain my Tunic.
But that's something that threw me off, because you played the Plunder Run and then you attacked me with Kadachi.
Yeah, so
that some kind of mind games?
Well, no, just to examine that quickly is, like, some players really like doing this play where, because the issue is you can't go Kadachi, then Plunder Run as it breaks the chain for Mask of Momentum. Yeah, which is a mistake I've made before for things like Push the Point. Sometimes I like just directly opening up with Plunder Run straight into my big attack and to force out the blocks. I think sometimes the problem is when you open up with the Plunder Run line and go double Kadachi, you're heavily incentivizing their third block, because then that's going to draw them 2 cards if it hits. So if there's ever a time to overblock, that's what they're overblocking. Mm-hmm. Again, it is contextual. Like, sure, if you go Kadachi, if you have all the resource and go Surging Strike for 8 and then can follow up with like Gust Wave Magenchi somehow, then yeah, that's fine. But I think sometimes for ninja players, that's something you want to be thinking about when you're playing. Like, if you need a Katsu trigger and you've got a leg tap in hand, if you open up with a red leg tap, there's a chance they block for 3 and you get that trigger. If you open up with Kadachi red leg tap, I can guarantee you that's never getting through, and then you've missed out on your potential master draw, and you've basically guaranteed you're not getting that Katsu either. So just one thing to keep in mind. So yeah, here I just did that because I figure I go Plunder Run, double Kadachi, and then I throw out a Hurricane Kick for 7 with Snapdragon Scalers up. And also, one thing here is I am representing potentially an Ancestral Empowerment or a Razor Reflex, because I do have that counter on Tunic.
Yeah, so this is something that really kind of threw me off. Was I was trying to think of a way to block it. I mean, it's attacking for 7, and at first I went for the double block, and then I realized that you still have those scalers up. That's why I decided to go for a different block.
And one thing you'll see here as well is, again, like we mentioned, don't give your opponent any information for free. So what Carol will do here, I'm just going to pause it briefly, like, you should never in any situation go block for 6 and then just throw down your card from Arsenal, which might seem obvious to the more experienced players, but I have seen it happen before. By blocking for 6 here, Carol can effectively, like, if I'm trying to get greedy and burn my Snapdragon Scalers here, Carol can get rid of my Snapdragon Scalers for free, because I'm thinking, okay, I'll get 1 damage out from this, I draw a card from Mask, I can cut to up a Fluster Fist, continue on the pressure, leave him with 1 card in hand. So there's a chance if I don't have Reflex, that's what I'm doing. Or I just play the Reflex simply to buff up the damage and get that Mask trigger and get going again. So I'm probably making a big deal of a minor point, but I think that's something really important for newer players and maybe even more experienced players just to always keep in mind.
Yeah, so basically I wasn't too sure whether I was waiting for Kieran to pop those scalers, because I thought, okay, well, if once he pops scalers, I can just sync from Arsenal and kind of stop that plunder run chain going.
And also here, if I use Razor Reflex, I'm left with no cards in hand. And that way then Carol's got options. He can pitch swing for 4, set a Sigil of Solace, and suddenly the game's getting quite close.
Yeah, exactly. I started to get worried about, is it a reflex? Is it an ancestral empowerment? How do I block this plunder run? I think what my thinking was, I think I've seen him block with a reflex, and I think he pitched a reflex at some point. So I thought maybe he just doesn't have it. But yeah, I feel like this was a really crucial turn, because I thought, okay, if Kieran decides to pop the scales, kind of like stop that attack, but he put me in a really tricky spot where he didn't pop the scalers, where I didn't know whether to use that sync or not, or just take that damage.
Yeah, and this is a play that sometimes you might, when you're going back and looking at the video, you might think, maybe I would have done something differently. But it can be difficult when you're under some time constraints in the middle of the game to come up with the optimal play when there's so many lines. Unfortunately for Carol here, because I've drawn so well and had so many good turns this game, it's put me in a position where I don't need to crack the scalers here. And I think that's also something for somebody just being happy with the damage you get through.
Yeah, so it deals 3 damage.
Yeah, because here I'm thinking, well, if I get 3 damage through and put him on 4, I get to draw a card from Mars, so I can arsenal my best card out of my 2 cards. And I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a big enough life lead that it's not critical for me to crack the scalers, get another card, and try and Katsu.
Yeah, I think looking back at the game, I think it was... I think I should have used that sync there, stop the damage.
So here
yeah,
I draw 2 additional cards from Mask and Plunder Run. And sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, so and it would also open an Arsenal card for me to, put a card in Arsenal from the Blood Rush Bellow. So I think, looking back at this, I think that was my big misplay.
The misplay, yeah, because despite the life totals, the game was actually pretty close. So if Carol had blocked differently there, it could have ended up being... Now, really unfortunately for Carol here is he draws 2 red cards, which is kind of devastating at this point.
Yeah, and I also considered, blocking and using that sigil, but I thought that maybe if I can just stall the game out, I'd be able to eventually draw into it. But yeah, see, here if I synced, put the
sigil on the bottom?
The sigil on the bottom, I still would have drawn a red, but it would have let me... I'm not sure if I drew the command, would have drawn the command or the barraging, but it would have let me put one of those cards in Arsenal, and I would have been on 7.
Yeah, and just to point out here why how these games always stay quite close, like if Carol had drawn something other than a command and conquer, like a yellow or a blue card, that allows him to play a barraging beatdown and attack for potentially 11 damage here, and that certainly makes it much tougher for me to block.
Yeah, especially with reckless swings still in my deck.
Yeah, now this final turn was a pretty fun one for me because I've written down in my notes so many lines. So I think the big one here is how you want to play out the turn, because I think there are a few arguments for how to play it out. One option is you can just go with the safe Kadachi into in line strike for 5 into like Magenchi, something along those lines. But in this position, I just really want to be closing the game out at this point. So I do have that yellow Gust Wave in Arsenal, and because I've still got the Snapdragon Scalers up, it allows me to potentially go for the Magenchi's release play with Go Again. And because I've actually got the Lord of Wind naturally, I can even follow up with that combo. So basically, I'm just trying to think here, is the correct play to go something like Gust Wave, then crack the Snapdragon Scalers, use Tunic for Magenchi's, and then just go Kadachi and Line and Strike for 7, Threatening Mask. Or I'm thinking, is that being too greedy? Do I just go and Line and Strike for 5, open up with my other turn? Ultimately, I kind of just wanted to be the man and drop the Gust Wave into a Magenchi's.
Yeah, I feel like I was quite happy to draw another sink in this situation because I knew that Kieran, had a five cards to play with and a Tunic, so I knew he had a big turn and I'm on 4 life.
The Reckless feels a little bit clunky here potentially.
Yeah, it does feel clunky, but I feel with 2 sinks I was able to turn it into a card that can block. I think it's only Bonehead Barrier and Reckless Swings are the only 2 cards that I can't block with, just with using it to block in my list.
And at this point, you'd burn through the Bonehead and 1 Reckless is already gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here I just open up with a Gust Wave, potentially threatening a Razor. I mean, Carol's got the defense react, so he's not super concerned about that here. But I figured this was the correct line to take in this situation.
Yeah, I felt like I was scared of that Razor, so I thought maybe I'd just save those defense reacts just in case you go. Because, an attack for 3 with no Go Again, that represents either Razor or popping Scalers to me.
Yeah, because there's no way I'm opening up with that unless I've...
And that's the thing, when you're playing these games, you have to be mindful of why is my opponent doing this? What could they have?
Yeah, no, I wanted to drop something like this because I felt like it would get out an equipment block, but also that it would probably get 2 equipments potentially because it's threatening 6 damage with the breaking scales. And that's something you can throw people off because a lot of time people are expecting sort of the full surging line, so sometimes people just aren't used to...
Yeah, and yeah, that lets me get rid of that Reckless Swing and get a card that blocks.
Yeah, now, one decision I did have here was, because I'd actually just rolled out the natural line, I could play a Lord of Wind for 5 here and actually shuffle 3 targets back in. The reason I didn't want to do something, and because then I can set the Enlightened Strike, so I've got a card in Arsenal and I'm sitting up for next turn. The reason I ultimately decided not to do that is when the life totals get kind of low like this, I'm worried that if I play Lord of Wind for 5, getting those targets back in actually isn't going to be as relevant as I want it to be. And also, if I attack for 5 here, it allows Carol to potentially just block out for 3 or 4 damage, 3, 4, or 5 damage even, and then just hit me back with a club and effectively just set up again.
Yeah, this is where it started to look scary for me. I'm on 3, and there's that another Enlightened Strike for 7, which that's the last thing I wanted to see, really. It forces me to use all my cards and just gives Kieran another turn to just Kadachi me down.
Yeah, quite often I like to Enlightened Strike for 5 to set a card in Arsenal, but in this situation, I knew the correct play was just keeping the pressure on.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that, throughout the game like this, as a brute player and playing defensively means that eventually I kind of get through Kieran's threats. So I was hoping to stall the game out a little bit and get to that stage where Kieran runs out of all these reds and all these combo pieces, where I can draw some sigils and get back into the game by just swinging with the club.
Yeah, no, the reason I set up the sequence this way was to force a double block on Sergio. I mean, it was probably going to get blocked anyway, given Carroll's life total, but it just allows me to ensure he double blocked that to stop the mass trigger, and then I can follow up with a gust wave
and
for
it
2.
just gets rid of cards in my hand and just weakens my turn.
And I'm pretty happy setting the sink here because I know all he can do is pitch and weapon swing, and then I can just sink that and sort of just go for the kill because 2 life against Kadachi is tough.
Yeah, plus at this point I was running out of my armor, and I was just hoping to stall it to start drawing those sigils.
Yeah, and actually I think here, well, just one minor thing is I think putting that rising knee thrust on the bottom was the wrong play. Just because it takes up another 0 cost card. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I think it would have been better to put the Hurricane technique on the bottom and then just go Kadachi, and Sergio. Yeah, so unfortunately at this point in the game, Carroll finally draws those barragings in the Command and Conquer.
That's where they were the whole game.
The best card, but yeah, at this point it's just pretty much impossible against Ninja with no armor, no arsenal. And you have to worry about things like Razor, but you just have to hope they don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dead to a Razor anyway at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's just enough to get through. Now, this probably wasn't the best example of the Brute Ninja matchup that you'll always see, or that you might see, because one thing for the viewers to note is Carroll didn't play a single Command and Conquer that game. He actually ended the game with the Goliath Gauntlet up.
Yeah, and it's something that I think that was one of the mistakes I made that game was in the early turn that I did draw that Command and Conquer. I think I should have saved it and potentially just attacked. And I feel like in this matchup you do want to use that Gauntlet on the very first command to really put pressure on the Ninja, because it does force a 3-card block. And it just shuts down their turn, and it just gives you a window to just really set up a barraging turn, or just a turn that deals 7 or so damage and puts pressure on the Ninja player.
Because one thing is that he mentioned there about just sort of taking the tempo effectively by making the block with 3 cards. Against Ninja, I mean, if they eat a Command and Conquer for 8 and you get the Arsenal card, that's just really good. I think it's a bit of a trap sometimes with Ninja, unless you're ahead and you've got the absolute nuts to decide to eat the Command and Conquer. Because if you take 8 damage, they effectively just block and reset.
Yeah, and I mean, Command just helps with anything that's in the arsenal, whether it's a plunder run, whether it's a combo piece. As long as they have an arsenal, you want to just play that command and really threaten it. And also, I mean, ninjas have a lot of cards that block for 2, which sometimes even just a command with no pummel or no Goliath's Gauntlet can really just put that pressure and force a 3-card block. Yeah, and it just, if it, that's the thing, like, if you have to block with 3 cards on just a Command and Conquer for 6, that is painful, like, big time painful on a ninja. And like we saw in that game, I managed to sort of take the momentum and then just keep it up throughout the whole game, aided by some pretty good draws. But like I was saying with the Command and Conquer there, sometimes against Ninja, all you need is 1 turn to steal back the tempo, and then it's really hard for them to get that back. So a Command and Conquer that strips 3 cards from my hand, that means my turn is effectively just Kadachi twice and pass. And then that means if the life totals are even just sort of relatively even, or even if you're a bit behind, that allows you to start proactively playing those single barraging beatdown plays, those Blood Rush Bellow plays. That, you know, Ninja, when you've got like a 10 or 12 life lead, you can kind of say, well, I've got the luxury of deciding what I want to do with this. When the game's even and you're faced with the start of a turn of
even just like a barraging beatdown into a pack hunt or a barraging beatdown weapon swing, anything like that, it's probably taking 2 cards out of your hands.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions about any plays, or whether it's the sideboard choices or any of the cards or plays, just leave some comments and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, and also if people have particular matchups they want to see, we're happy to take requests. Like we mentioned before, we're generally pretty competent with most decks. Some decks we might not be as good on as others, but if there's anything people particularly want to see, we'll do our best to.
Yeah,
to
we
get that
do
sorted out.
want to give you an overview of, the competitive matchups. Yeah, basically just let us know what matchups you want us to have a look at, and we're happy to cover that. This is the first video overview of a matchup that we've done, but we really want to do as many as possible.
Yeah, and like we say, we're really happy to take any feedback, criticism, suggestions. Anyway, we hope you found this guy. We hope you all found this useful, and good luck for all your future tournaments.
Session Blood.